What is up guys, and welcome back to another Classic WoW video. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, a topic that I've always been very interested in is the topic of fresh Classic servers for Classic WoW, and as a matter of fact I was a huge advocate for fresh servers for Classic TBC as well, as I think it just expands the game's lifetime by a lot by giving people the option to start all over without best in slot gear and also having to re-level from scratch. Now I'm kind of glad that this didn't happen, as it could have split the community between people that decided to start fresh for TBC versus those who wanted to keep going, and the fact that they didn't give us fresh servers for TBC Classic made me even more hyped for fresh Classic WoW servers later down the line, and I think now is the perfect time to implement fresh servers for Classic WoW, and it looks like Blizzard agrees, as we have some huge indicators for fresh servers for Classic WoW coming out sooner than you might think. So first off, let's talk about the recent news that is pointing towards a fresh Classic server, and that is the fact that just yesterday, or a couple of days ago depending on when I get this video uploaded, a PTR, aka public test realm for Classic Era, suddenly popped up on the Battle.net launcher, without any blue post, announcement or anything from Blizzard, at least that I could find, and previously the only PTRs available were for Retail and TBC Classic, and now another one showed up for Classic Era. Now this could mean several things, but the one thing it does mean is that Blizzard is making some changes, and they want us to test it, since once again this is a test realm. Now the changes they could be making here are, for example, Classic Plus, emerging servers, or Fresh Classic, and there are some extra indicators on why this specific PTR is for a Fresh Classic server. If you log on to the Classic Era PTR, right now at the time of making this video, you can't copy a character over there unless you have pre-copied one, so it is a little bit difficult to test max level stuff, but based on the information that I've received from other people that did have the foresight to pre-copy characters, multiple raids and instances are closed. For example, Zul'Gurub is closed, Naxxramas is closed, the Gates of AQ has not been opened yet, and several NPCs that would be in the game in later content phases are not currently in the game, and basically the Classic Era PTR is in the stage of Phase 1 of Classic WoW, meaning they are retesting Classic WoW in its Phase 1 stage of the game. For example, if you try and zone into Naxxramas on the Classic Era PTR, it will literally tell you this raid is not yet available. Same thing with Zul'Gurub and any dungeon or raid added after Phase 1. Now all of this being said, there are things that are now in the Classic Era PTR that was not in Phase 1 of original Classic WoW, like for example the Chronoboon Displacer from Chromie is in fact available, which is an item that you can use to preserve your world buffs, which reduces the risk of getting ganked when you have world buffs active. Now if you remember a while back, I think this was before TBC Classic even came out, at least it's been a while, Blizzard sent out a couple of different surveys to random people, asking for feedback based on a future fresh Classic server, where they were looking to make some changes and alter the gameplay experience. These changes involve faster experience to level up, a barbershop, no world buffs in raids, increasing debuff limit on raid bosses to allow for more variety in gameplay and less throttling of DPS, black market auction house for vanity items, original WOTLK Valley design, more difficult raid bosses and dungeon encounters, increased rate of item drops, earning gold faster, and summoning stones at dungeon entrances. Now, while these changes are currently not active on the PTR, I do believe Blizzard is throwing the Phase 1 of Classic WoW onto the PTR to implement these changes over time, and they want us to test it. Things like increasing the experience rate, item drops and gold drops is something we don't really need to test, as they can just tweak some numbers, but things I would expect to see them add to the Classic Era PTR for us to test are things like the original WOTLK Valley design, as well as some more difficult raid bosses and dungeon encounters where they can make us test things, and then they can tweak boss encounters based on player feedback. Now all of this being said, I think it's incredibly weird this randomly popped up on the PTR without Blizzard announcing anything, and there's barely any information out there about it, let alone a word from Blizzard that they are currently working on a fresh Classic project, but based on this PTR of Classic Era in its Phase 1 stage, plus some changes already being available, I think it is clear that Blizzard is looking at a potential re-release of Classic WoW in the near future, with some changes according to both the changes currently available on the PTR, but also based on the surveys that they sent out, and I think we'll be seeing a lot of the things mentioned on that survey being tested on the Classic Era PTR over the next couple of weeks, and I would not be surprised if we see a fresh Classic server releasing a little bit after Phase 2 of TBC Classic to cover some downtime in between content phases or content patches for TBC Classic, and also to cover some downtime for content in retail, and I think there's a market for a fresh Classic server out there. Now, before I talk about my opinions on this, I want to ask you guys, if a fresh Classic server came out, which I mean it's almost confirmed at this point, would you play it? And which changes would you personally like seeing in a potential re-release of Classic WoW? Please let me know in the comments down below. Personally, I'm really hyped for a potential fresh Classic server, as leveling in Classic WoW truly is something way different than leveling in any other game out there, and it's also way different than any other WoW expansion as well. It is not that the quests are insanely good or anything like that, but the simplicity behind it, as well as the complexity between having to move back and forth between multiple zones, and having to utilize pretty much every zone in order to level up, it just makes the world feel insanely big, and Blizzard shows you how big the world of Azeroth really is by making you walk all the way around it. Add an insanely awesome community on top of that, and you've got a recipe for success, in my opinion. And the Classic WoW community really is incredible, and I think revisiting Classic WoW will at least bring a part of that community back, as a lot of people from Classic WoW have no interest in TBC Classic, and vice versa as well, which means the community in TBC Classic is completely different than the community in Classic WoW. At least that's been my experience so far. Now, I know that a lot of people will say it's too soon, but is it really? It's been 2 years since the release of Classic WoW at this point, and while TBC Classic just came out a couple of months ago, you might argue that we just had Classic WoW, why would we go back? But the fact is that Phase 1 of Classic WoW is entirely different than Phase 6 in terms of content. You're actually leveling up from scratch and gearing up from scratch. You are not just rerunning Naxxramas for the 647th time this week, and you're not just trying to up your parses by farming for that 0.001% damage upgrade. We already saw the success of a private server called Darrowshire, which aims to be a vanilla-like private server that has thousands of players, on a not very well-known private server by the way, which already shows there is an interest in playing vanilla WoW, and there is an interest in a re-release. It just has to be done right. So that is pretty much it for this video, guys. Classic Era is being tested on the PTR in its Phase 1 stage, and we are one step closer to a fresh Classic server coming out. If you did enjoy the video, make sure you give it a like, so we can push it into the algorithm, and if you're looking for more Classic WoW content, make sure you subscribe. That is it for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.